Good morning to you all, and welcome to the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg Postgraduate School. My name is Koketso Pila, and I will be your moderator today. So please allow me to start off by thanking our attendees for taking the time to join us. And most importantly, we would like to thank our presenter, Prof. Chinaza, for his effort with preparing and giving this presentation. Before I officially introduce Prof. Chinaza to you, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules and some important information. For the housekeeping rules, if you do have questions during the session, please raise your hand if you would like to speak, or you can type in your question in the chat box and I will indicate to the presenter to address the question. And also the recording link and the presentation slides will be up by the end of this week. And also the feedback survey chat box during the session. May we please request that you fill out the survey to give us some information on whether this workshop was useful and how we can improve as well as to provide some kind words to our facilitator. And the survey will also serve receiving certificates. So when you complete the survey, you will be able to receive the certificates of attendance. So without wasting any more time, I would like to introduce our presenter, Prof. Chinaza, by reading out his bio. So Prof. Chinaza Ulianya is an educationalist, researcher, and an associate professor in the Department of Education, Leadership and Management, University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He completed his doctoral degree program in the Department of Social Sciences, Education at the University of Zululand, South Africa in May 2018. In quest for becoming a better researcher, he embarked on a postdoctoral research fellowship in the Department of Business Management, University of South Africa, after serving a 2-year term as postdoctoral research fellow in the Department of Education, Leadership and Management, University of Johannesburg, South Africa. Previously, Prof. Chinaza had his honors and master's in sociology of education, respectively from the Lagos State University, Lagos, Nigeria. His doctoral thesis focused on learning challenges amongst undergraduate students in selected rural universities in South Africa and Nigeria. Prof. Chinaza Ulianya has presented papers both in local and international conferences, as well as seminars and workshops. In 2018, he emerged as one of the winners of the Emerging Scholar Award from Common Ground Research Network and a scholarship from Southern African Association in Institutional Research. In 2019, as a postdoctoral fellow, he received an award of excellence from the University of Johannesburg for his research output. Likewise, in 2020, he received an award research output from the University of Zululand. As a researcher, Prof. Chinaza Ulianya holds collaboration with high regards. This has with scholars from different fields of endeavor within and outside South Africa, as well as the continent. One of his collaborations has led to a successful completion of a global research involving over 90 nations from 6 continents of the world. He currently sits on the doctoral board of different journals, some of which are Journal of Educational Studies, South Africa Journal of Education and E-Learning Research. He is an associate editor of Reading and Writing Journal and an academic editor of the following journals: the Sage Open and the PLOS One. Prof. Chinaza Ulinganya has supervised both honors, master's, and doctoral students to completion and has examined thesis and dissertation from different universities. He is currently a board member of the International Society Exploring Teaching and Learning based in the United States. Officially hand over to Prof. Chinaza. Over to you, Prof.
Good morning, colleagues. Can I start by saying thank you to the research office, um, RCD unit to be precise, for this opportunity. And then a big thank you to everyone who has made time out to come for this discussion. I think I'd like to put it that way, a discussion. Um, because I'll be sharing tips on effective dissertation and thesis examination. Outrightly, when I saw the topic, I was wondering, oh, really, this is good for the research office to think, RCD to think to these points, because in actual sense, this is not one area that many people would consider as something that the research or the RCD would probably decide to organize a workshop for. Can I start by asking, is there anyone in the room who has examined or reviewed, let me start with that, reviewed a journal article before? If you have read a journal article, just use any emoji to give me a sign. Anyone? Okay. Isaac, I was almost going to call Isaac Ajigo and then, okay. All right, Vazio, thank you so much. All right, so it means that you're already making headway. All right, maybe I should take it a step further. Is there anyone who has examined a dissertation before or a thesis? Maybe master's dissertation or mini dissertation or thesis. All right, thank you so much, Vazio. Okay. Um, Krista, would you mind to share your experience? What was your experience like when you examined the dissertation? Or was it a dissertation, mini dissertation, full dissertation, or thesis? Which one did you examine? Would you like to unmute and share with us?
Oh,
Or,
sorry. I see. No, I see. I've been given access. So I had to. I've moderated quite a lot. We are quite a small field. So I did review a excellent dissertation from Northwest University in around 2020, and I just felt a little bit humbled by the experience, and because it was such an exceptional piece of work.
oh, oh, that's good. I think I like that. Good for you that you examine an exceptional piece of work. It can be frustrating sometimes when you examine certain things that are not exceptional. Let me use that expression. Allow me. Um, it can be frustrating sometimes, and sometimes you want to ask yourself, What did the supervisor do? Or well, let's go on this journey together and see what we can do. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, we want to get this experience. We want to learn more. We want to see how we can become better in this whole thing, in the whole journey of examining thesis. And so I decided to title it Tips on Effective Dissertation and Thesis Examination. Just certain tips. We just look at them together and then we see what we can do. Um, the first question you want to ask is, why should I examine a master thesis, or rather a master dissertation or doctoral thesis, critically? Why should I do such? I mean, after all, the institution will pay me, no matter how small. They will send me some money. So why not just close my eyes, examine what I have to examine, and forget about it, and drop it there, send it back to them? Um, I'm glad Krista said what she examined was exceptional. But then, where in a case where it's not exceptional, why can't I just put what I want to do, put my report together, and send it out. I have had a student before whose work was sent out, and the examiner did not give comment on maybe give a feedback. And you would expect that the student would have scored maybe 100 if there's no feedback, or probably 90. And at the end of the day, the examiner gave the student, I think, was not 60 or thereabout, or close to 70, something like that. And I was wondering, but my HOD picked that up to say, okay, if there's no comment at all, it means the student did well, or what? How did he arrive at that score? So it means that sometimes people just take it like, let me just fill the form and submit and do whatever I like, score the student whatever I want to score the student, and move on with that. Because in the actual sense, it is a subjective work. It is subject to the examiner's thoughts. So somebody like what Krista says exceptional, believe me, you may be amazed. Maybe the second examiner, if it's a dissertation that warrants two examiners, or probably a doctoral thesis that warrants three, you may be amazed that one of the other examiners probably maybe saying this is just fair, 50. Another may even be saying, return to me. There are so many corrections that need to be made. Return back the work to me. So it's so because it is a subjective kind of thing. And unless you consciously say, no, I want to be objective and not subjective. And that's the first reason why we must critically ask ourselves that question. Why should I examine this thesis in a way that it should be, and not just do it the way I assume? So I just put some points here to guide to say, no, it's not a time to show favoritism or nepotism based on relationship with students or supervisors. It's not. Though sometimes some people think about it that way. In fact, that's why some supervisors nominate you to examine, because they feel, okay, I know this person. I know Isaac. I know Sam. I know Krista. Let me give them the work. I know they'll be fair with my student. Fine. Of course, you should be fair. But in being fair, you need to be what? Objective. Very, very objective and not subjective. I recently examined a thesis that was sent to me from UNISA. And funny enough, this thesis, when I got the thesis, I found out that it was someone I once worked with somewhere in another institution. The first thing I flagged off to the postgraduate school was, I know this person. Should I still go ahead? Of course, personally, I know there won't be conflict of interest. And they said, no, I should go ahead as long as I treat it confidential. And so I had to just make sure it was confidential. Funny enough, along the way, the person was still communicating with me over other things, not knowing that I had this thesis in front of me. And of course, I had to keep it discreet. He never knew. And it's left to them to decide if they want to reveal my identity or not. So what I'm trying to say in essence is, you get these things, you may know the fellow, but then, like Krista said, it's a small field. As is a small field, you may know these persons, but then you must ensure that you are objective and not subjective. And that's why personal integrity matters here. Personal integrity matters here. That fellow that you feel like, oh no, this is just an exceptional student or a good student, because you are subjective. Now, this is me trying to say because you're subjective now, not being objective. And so I give this person 80 distinction, may eventually go out and conduct a research that will become a monumental waste, but that may affect you in the end. Because, like they say, what goes around comes around. So may end up becoming um, maybe your son's supervisor. Yes, go ahead. I see the hand is up. Okay, so okay, so
Sorry, no, that was that was a mistake.
all right. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. All right. Just speak if you. I think you should just unmute and speak if ever I don't pick that. Okay, so one reason why you should be critical in examining the master's dissertation or doctoral thesis is constructive feedback is important. Very important that you give constructive feedback. It's not compulsory that you reject the work, no. But those constructive feedbacks that you give will eventually help to strengthen the work and help the person know areas where he or she needs to improve and work on. So sometimes you make one feel like he's a good researcher because of what you told him or shown him or given to him as feedback while examining the thesis. Whereas at the end, he or she is not up to the standard that you have hyped or raised him to be. So there is need for you to ensure that you're critical in your examination and you give constructive feedback, not just for the now, especially for the future, because that fellow may have to probably supervise your own brother, your own sister, your own friend, your own child. And if that fellow supervises such a person without the accurate knowledge, based on the fact that the wrong feedback was given while the thesis or exam or master's dissertation was being examined, then you can be sure that there'll be trouble somewhere. And so, what your feedback does is to give the fellow the required skills or need to consider the required skills and do the right thing. Okay, and don't forget that when a person does master's, PhD, sometimes the focus is to become an academics, get into the world of academia, and then see what they can do. Now, if they become, say, a lecturer or a researcher, and they don't do justice, believe me, you may not like it. And then don't forget, in some instances too, some institutions will upload the documents to the repository. And should they choose to do that, including your name as the examiner, would you be okay? Would you be fine with that? So I think asking yourself this question should give us a guide to say, okay, am I doing a critical work or not? Now let's just look at the two from different angles so that I don't focus on just one. So master's dissertation, doctoral thesis. As critical as you want to be, as harsh, if I may use that expression, as you may wish to be, as simple as you may want to be, as objective as you may want to be, I'd like you to take note of this. And this is one of the things I learned years back. When you examine a master's dissertation, try to examine the work as though you're treating a matric learner's work. I know somebody is surprised. Matric? Yes. Why? The idea behind masters is you want to ask yourself, has this person been able to master the methodology? That's a major focus when it comes to master dissertation. Has the fellow been able or the students be able to master the methodology? Does this person know how to select the right research methodology to be used? And has this person been able to use that methodology well? So most times the focus is being able to master the methodology. And as you examine the work, there's need to look at it from the angle of as though I'm treating the work of a matric learner. Whereas for PhD, they always say, think about it from treating the work of an undergraduate student. Maybe bearing this in mind would help us know where and when we should be lenient, and where and when we should be what? Very strict. There are certain areas where there is need to be strict, and there are certain areas where there is need to be what? Lenient. For example, when examining a doctoral thesis, one major question you may want to ask, excuse my use of this expression, what is the doctoralness in this work? So what is doctoral about this doctoral thesis? That's a major question. And that's why for doctoral thesis, there's always the question of what is the contribution? What is the contribution? What problem will this person be solving? Or probably, what problem will this person be providing solution to? There's always that area. There is need to identify it. Because in the end, it's a doctoral thesis. And for doctoral studies, there's always an assumption or a belief, which is true, and I agree with that, that a problem must have been identified. It's not about being able to master the research rigor or methodology. Of course, at master's level, it's assumed that you already know that. But at doctoral level, what is this person contributing to the global world? Of course, no one researcher can solve the world's problem. So I remember I made that error while I was taking my PhD. I was going through. There were too many things. I was wanted to solve the world's problem, and I remember my supervisor saying to me, "You can't solve the world's problem." And so, at doctoral level, the idea is: has this fellow been able to identify a minute area, no matter how small, but has this fellow been able to identify a small area or a small problem that needs solution? Then, having justified that he's been able to identify that, the next question is, so as you read through, bear that in mind. So from the beginning, from the chapter one, while you try to examine the thesis, you start asking yourself, all right, with all the things that this fellow is saying here and there, what is the problem that he has identified? Once you're able to pick up that problem, go straight to the aims and objectives and find out, has this fellow been able to reflect that same problem as one of the objectives or as the aim? And then at the end, when you get to the end of the thesis, ask yourself, has this person been able to provide a realistic solution to the problem identified? If yes, all right, then you can now come back. What method was used? Okay, so in other words, the issue of the solution being identified, is it based on the findings of the research or based on assumption? And of course, if it's based on assumption, that can't fly. It can never fly. It won't even fly in a journal article, let alone fly in a doctoral thesis. So it must not be based on assumption. So is this person providing the solution based on the actual findings of the study? And then that will warrant you to ask another question. Is the conclusion drawn based on the findings of the study? Are the recommendations done based on the findings of the study? Because it's possible for me to identify a problem, and when I do my recommendation in the end, it's not based on the findings. So it's based on my speculation, based on my assumption that that's how it should be, that's what happens, or whatever. And then I just give my recommendations. Very possible. But in that case, it means I've not done justice. So, as an examiner, it is up to you to flag that, to say, no, this is not in alignment. And that's where in research we always talk about the golden thread. So, I know when we write, we have that in mind. So, as you examine the thesis or the dissertation, there is need to also what? Check for the golden thread. Ensure to check what's the rigor. Is there a link between the title and the problem statement, and the aims and objectives, the research question? Check for that rigor through the literature review session, through the methodology, as the person used the right methodology. Otherwise, because in some instances, the problem has been identified, but the wrong method has been used. So say, for example, a study that warrants a mixed method, and the person chooses to use qual and quant because some people assume they are the same. Mixed method and qual and quant are not the same. I can do a mixed method. Yes, if I do a mixed method, I use qual and quant. It's possible. But it's possible that I use qual and quant without doing a mixed method, because I have not mixed them. So I can choose not to mix them. So sometimes people just assume that they are the same, and the student may end up making that mistake as well, where he or she was supposed to have used a mixed method ends up doing qual and quant, assuming they are the same. Now, as an examiner, it is up to you to pick such things up, because you are like the referee in a football pitch, in a football match. When you blow your whistle and you say it's a goal, then it's a goal. So in this case now, if you approve and endorse the student's work, there may be problems somewhere in the end if it does not qualify to be a doctoral thesis. A quick one, let's come back to master's dissertation. When you look at the master's dissertation, yes, I've said earlier, try to examine as though you're treating a matric learner's work. Good. So try to be as lenient as possible. That's the idea. But despite or regardless of being lenient, you must check, has justice been made, especially in the area of the methodology? Ask again, and this is one question that should continuously ring in your mind. Does this fellow qualify for a PhD? The moment you ascertain that that fellow does not qualify for a PhD, it means that whatever grade you give that fellow must not be up to 65. At least for most institutions, it's 65. Somebody must score 65 before they qualify for PhD. So the moment I ascertain that this person has done a good job, but then not good enough to proceed to do a PhD, then that person should not score up to 65, at least for my own judgments. The other examiner can afford to give something maybe higher, whichever way. And at the end of the day, when they do the aggregate and get the average, they decide whether the person should go or not. But at least I would have done justice, and I would have been fair enough by ensuring that that fellow is not awarded 65. And mind you, that's why many times when you examine dissertation or thesis, especially for dissertation, not necessarily thesis, they ask you, the institution will give you a form and they will ask you somewhere, does this work qualify for to be awarded distinction? So the idea is, peradventure, the second examiner decides to say, oh, award a distinction. Do you agree with it? So in such instance where you have found out that this person does not qualify for PhD, then flag it off. Stick there that no, you don't agree for a distinction if the second examiner opts for a distinction. And so in your own little way, because you're giving feedback, of course, if you find out that this person has not done justice, like I said for dissertation, master's dissertation, the focus most times is on, does this person understand the rigor of research, especially the issue of methodology? Ensure to give a robust feedback. The good thing with the feedback is for students who are smart and really eager and serious about becoming good researchers, you can be sure that they will take such feedback, work on them, and get better. The fellow may decide to go for a second master's just to qualify for a PhD. So that could help. Your feedback then becomes important. Let's come a little back to doctoral thesis. I stated here, ask yourself what is new in what this person is saying. I've seen some PhD studies that actually they look good. They look good, and ordinarily, in my opinion, they will qualify for a master's dissertation, but not a PhD, because there's no new knowledge being contributed. And so sometimes when my students approach me, they want to do PhD, they want me to supervise them, and they send in their proposal. One of the things I always want to find out is, for a PhD, what new knowledge are you bringing to the floor? What are you asking us? What are you sharing with the world that you say, oh, at the end of the day, this is something that you should be known for? Because the moment a person does PhD, from that point of PhD, is known to be like a master of something, a master of a particular field, or a master in a particular field. He or she should be consulted any day, anytime in that area. So that new knowledge that person is contributing becomes something that he or she can grow. And that's why, as an examiner, you want to pick it up. I must say here that as an examiner, sometimes the students may not like you. You and I know what it looks like. We've had experiences, at least for a master's, you know what the report looked like when it came back, or maybe for a PhD, and maybe you never liked the response of the one of the examiners. And if you have submitted a journal article before, you know what it looks like when out of maybe three reviewers, one person is saying no, and others are saying, oh, accept. And one person, you know how you feel. So that's the same thing that happens here. The student may not like you, but that's not to say that you shouldn't do justice, because it is needed. And that's exactly what may change the whole situation for that particular fellow in the end. The fellow may not like you initially, but in the end may say, oh, I'm glad I got those feedback. It helped me brace up, and I did. All right, let's move on now. For whether master's or PhD, other questions you want to ask yourself is, um, has literature review been done properly? Does this fellow know how to review literature? That's a major challenge. I found out sometimes that yes, people say they've done literature. In fact, they give the heading literature review, but in the end, they've not done any literature review. They've just presented the the comments or the statement or expressions or quotes of scholars in the actual sense. And this is what I think, and I'll share this with you because even with besides the idea of reviewing thesis or dissertation, when you supervise, it could help you. One of the things I always want to say to my students, and interestingly, one of my students is on this platform today. One of the things I always want to say is when you review literature, always think of the review from the point of view of an upside down triangle. Upside down triangle. So a normal triangle has got one point at the top and 2 points at the bottom, the base. But an upside down triangle, when you flip it, it becomes what? Two sides at the top and one at the bottom. What does this mean? And somebody is wondering, what's all this nonsense? No. What does it mean? It means that looking at the top, two sides, I want to ask, as one who is reviewing a literature or different sources in relation to my work, the first point here, which the first point at the top, I'm saying, asking myself, okay, probably what is a scholar saying in relation to the discussion at hand? So probably I get a scholar who supports what I'm saying. A good example can be eating healthy aids quality education. Now that's just a claim. Now I have a scholar who is supporting that, and probably I have another scholar who is contrasting that, who is saying no, it has nothing to do with quality education. Now those are the 2 points, and then the bottom becomes my own deduction, which is my submission based on the two different literature that has been reviewed. Now, sometimes when you read through theses or dissertations, you find out that the candidates just present what people have said without making deductions, which is the bottom of that upside down triangle. There is need to find out. And so when institutions send the documents that you should review, rather examine the thesis or the dissertation, they always want to find out. One of the things you give you there as the criteria that they want you to check on their behalf and report on is, has this candidate been able to do justice in reviewing literature? Now, one of the things you can do there is to make it easy for you. As you read through the literature, review session, find out, did this person just present the work of other people, or the person was able to make a logical deduction? So from what was presented that other scholars stated or said, either supporting or contrasting, has this person been able to make a deduction from that? And having made that deduction, is it logical enough? Is it in alignment with the discussion on ground? So those are some of the things you want to find out as you check the literature review session. Okay, and then you also want to find out if the candidate has been able to use recent materials. Recent materials. The reason why we usually discourage old sources, except for maybe the session of literature, theoretical frameworks, theories. Yes, we use old sources. But sometimes when it comes to general literature review, the reason why we prefer recent materials or recent sources is because it's assumed that the recent sources must have built on what the old sources have been able to produce. So the best is to go by what the recent source states. So it's ideal that you check that. And of course, many a time they always say the literature sources should not be older than 5 years. Should not be older than 5 years. So this is 2024, for example. If I'm to examine a thesis in 2024, then the literature should not be older than maybe 2018. Yes, 2018 is almost 6 years, but then it can still fly. But that's not to say that the fellows, the candidates cannot use things that are old, but then it should be minimal. At least it should be scattered here and there, just few. But when it comes to the real sources, when you check the reference list in the end, you should have more recent sources than old sources. We'll still come back to talk more on them to pick out one or two things on the issue of literature again. But let's come to the issue of the theory. Are the candidates able to identify relevant and suitable theories or framework for their studies? You may not be able to tell 100% because there are several theories out there. And you may be thinking of theory A, that this theory A is best for a study like this. Mind you, the reason why they approach you to examine the thesis is because it's your field. For example, anybody who brings anything to me to say I should examine from science, from chemistry, they are just joking. I will decline because I don't know it. I'll be lying if I say I will examine such things, except they probably ask me to check a minute area that probably I may have a brief knowledge on. So for them to approach you to say examine this thesis means that it's your field and you qualify to do so. And mind you, a committee must sit to approve that you qualify to do so. So you want to find out, you may have a theory in mind to say, oh, this is the best theory for a study like this because it's your field. But don't conclude yet. This is where I prefer that you have an open mind. Don't conclude yet. Check the theory that the fellow has used and see if that theory, if the fellow has been able to adapt the theory, adopt or adapt it in the most useful way to ensure that it aligns with his or her study. So in your opinion as an examiner, it may not be the best theory to adopt for such a study, but then has the fellow been able to adopt or adapt that theory in the best way for that particular study? Then that means if he has done that, then that fellow should be awarded or given an applause in that case. But if not, then you can of course give your own suggestion to your own recommendation. Say no, this would be a better theory. Okay. Now, when we come over to probably later on, but let me just mention this quickly. One of the things I found that when it comes to examination of thesis and dissertation, people just, when they talk about theories, they just talk about theories or theoretical framework or conceptual framework. They just drop it there, maybe in their chapter 2. and they end it there. As an examiner, you should be able to trace it somewhere in chapter 4 or chapter 5, depending on where the person does the analysis or discussion. Has this fellow been able to link the theory back to the analysis? So after analyzing, is the person being able to give us a report to show whether the analysis corresponds or the findings from the analysis corroborates what the theory states or not? So it's not enough just stating theory somewhere in chapter 2 and ending it there. No, the fellow should be able to report the same in, in chapter 4 or chapter 5, where the analysis and discussion is done. So it's in your it's part of your duty as an examiner to check those things and report them as well. So where the person has not been able to do so, one of your recommendations should be, oh, there is need to do X, Y, Z. And that will help the fellow go back again to look at the theory and try to marry the theory with the analysis or report something there. Okay. And then very importantly, you want to also check if the candidates are consistent with their referencing. When it comes to in-text referencing, it can be very funny, very, very funny. In fact, it can be as funny as the use of the ampersand. So you see some people sometimes when they write, they put a citation, and then because there are multiple authors, or probably two or more authors, they just say, okay, in brackets now, Gamede and Duma 2020. They use A-N-D. And then somewhere along the line, they end up using Gamede and Hapasan, Duma. Now, such things as an examiner should be picked up by you. They may look minute and insignificant, but they are very important and crucial. That's part of what makes the research. If you don't pick such things up, believe me, you may be surprised that the same students or the candidates, after obtaining his PhD or probably master's degree, will continue with that same mindset, believing that is the right way to do it. And in the end, that's an error. Becomes, of course, it's a very serious error. So there is need to check such things. Okay, I've mentioned this. If the sources are recent, it's your duty to check such things. If the adopted methodology is realistic and relevant to the study, it's your duty to do so. And of course, if the presentation of finding is logical, there's need to ask that question. If the presentation of findings is logical. I've seen cases where people just say, oh, they present the issue, they present it in themes. You present in themes. How did you arrive at themes? There's need to explain when you talk about the analysis. To say, oh, there was coding, there was categorization, and then before themes were generated. Such things are important. And then you see some people, when they do their report their findings, they just go ahead and say theme 1. No explanation. But the assumption is readers should know. But of course, as an examiner, help them realize that there's no need to assume here. Present everything plainly. There's need for the examiner, for the readers to know that, no, this is what should be done. Okay? And let's come down to the different chapters. And I may try to.
Prof. Chinaza, can I
Yes.
disturb you for a minute?
Please go ahead.
Is it possible if you can minimize the pop-up, because I see at some point it's blocking some of the content on the slides?
Oh, okay.
You can minimize it, yes.
Is this okay?
Yes, it's fine.
All right. Now let's just look at some of the chapters and what you should expect, what may be expected of you when you examine a thesis or a dissertation, whichever one. We've been saying thesis, dissertation, master's dissertation, doctoral thesis. That most times that's the assumption that when it's master's is dissertation, and then when it's PhD is thesis. Sometimes, of course, there are some disparities between the two of them. Okay, sometimes it could be maybe the volume or the focus, but then let's leave that. So whichever one you're doing, either of the two, there is need to ask certain questions and identify these things as you answer the questions yourself. So you ask yourself those questions and you answer the questions yourself. There's need to check the use of academic writing. And by academic writing, you will save yourself so much. I used to have that challenge of using sweeping statements. I just use sweeping statements. That's when I mean sweeping statement now. By sweeping statement, I mean making claims that are unsubstantiated. You just make claims. Whereas in the world of research, they will always say, no, you are not yet an authority. A master candidate or a master student or PhD candidate is not yet an authority in that field to make such claims. So to make certain claims. So whatever claim they make, it may look so easy, it may look so simple, it may look so true and realistic, but because academic writing is needed, as an examiner, call their attention to it to say, no, this claim is too strong for you to make. There is need to substantiate it with what? Relevant sources. So check if they've been able to use academic writing and how well they've done that. And that's why, of course, as an examiner, you must also understand the art of writing, the use of academic writing. You must understand that as well. Still on the introductory chapter, which is chapter 1, you want to ask yourself or ask the question whether the chapter accurately set the pace for the study. Because sometimes the title may be very clear, fantastic, but then that introductory chapter has not set the pace for the study itself. Some things are needed. In fact, if it's a thesis by articles, or rather by publication, okay, is thesis by publication. Meaning, what I mean by thesis by publication means that the different chapters will be written in form of journal articles. It becomes more crucial or critical because chapter 1 is meant to set the pace for every other journal article that will be represented by chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. So the chapter 1 may differ a little because in the way it will be presented in chapter 1, it must show that chapter 2 is a journal article, chapter 3 is a journal article, chapter 4 is a journal article, and of course, chapter 5 will be what? The conclusion. So chapter 1 and chapter 5 will be different from the regular thesis that we know, the way to be written. But then, whichever way, whether it's the regular thesis or thesis by publication, uh, um, you always want to ask whether the first chapter has set the pace. And that's why sometimes people overlook the background, but that's not true. The background matters. Does this person really have a good background of the problem that is to be explored or researched into? It's the background of the study that should lead us into the problem statements. So it's not just enough coming up with problem statements, the background. And that's where I go back to the issue of the golden thread. So does the background of the study speak to the problem statement? And of course, does it speak to the research? And I always want to make it easy. I always say, convert your research question to a statement. It gives you your research objective. In fact, it goes as far as saying, does research question 1 speak to research objective 1? Research question 2, does it speak to research objective 2? There must be that rigor. that alignment. It's not something to be overlooked. Then, still on the introductory chapter, you want to ask whether appropriate literature sources have been reviewed or checked or explored and used to justify claims. I know sometimes people want to overlook the use of literature in chapter one. No, there is need to use literature in making certain claims in chapter one. There is need. Then you want to find out whether the gaps have been well identified. Because sometimes you find similar studies. So somebody is coming to conduct a study which is similar to what has been conducted before. As an examiner, ask the question, okay, if this study has been conducted before, in fact, you may be amazed that the fellow may even report that same literature in his or her work. If this has been conducted before, why conducting the study again? That's the issue of the gap now. There's a scholar who identified, I think these 7 ways of identifying gaps in a study. So check what's the gap that this fellow is presenting. Has this person been able to identify the gap and also justify it in his or her study? It's one thing to present the gap. It's another thing to justify it. Okay, based on this, this is the reason why my study should fly. We need to just critique these things. And then you ask yourself if the study is worth conducting or not from chapter one. And then, of course, the last thing you want to check is the order of the chapters. And this is where you want to find out, okay, if it's a journal article, is it worth having 5 chapters? If it's maybe journal by thesis by publication, should it have 5 chapters or 6? I know sometimes as examiners, we don't think about these things. We just leave the issue of the chapterization. We assume, no, everything is fine there. But that's not true. It's important to check if it's worth it. Sometimes somebody might have presented 5 chapters, but in your opinion, 6 chapters may be best. I'll give an example. When I was doing my PhD, I wanted 6 chapters because I wanted to separate my quantitative findings from my qualitative findings. I used a mixed method. I wanted to separate the two of them. But my supervisor said, no, put the two in a chapter. And of course, I agreed and I allowed it to fly. So I ended up having 5 chapters. But by the time the work went out, an examiner picked it up and said, no, there is need to split this into 2 so I could own the findings from the qualitative part of the study. And it was good for me. So it was like what I wanted. In the end, it was a win-win for me. Yes, I went back to do the work again, but then I was good with it because I wanted it. So as an examiner, you may be helping that student by checking that section to find out, okay, instead of 5 chapters, is there a need for 6 chapters? And of course, whatever you suggest, you have your reason for such. And the onus is on the supervisor and the student to also accept. So don't forget, as an examiner, you are also being examined because the students and the supervisor also have the prerogative to decide to say, okay, do we agree with this comment or not? That's why your comment must be logical enough and you must know what you're saying and justify, possibly give the rationale for whatever decision you're making. If anything should change, state it there. What you think should change and why you think it should change. Very important. Now, when it comes to the literature, I've said a mouthful when I was discussing this earlier, but then I'll just mention a few things here, just to reiterate some of the things I said. Find out if the student or the candidate has been able or has the ability to review the relevant literature. Relevant. The key word here is relevant. So whatever the literature the fellow is presenting, is it relevant to that heading that the fellow is discussing? either the heading or the subheading. Then another question, is the heading or subheading relevant to the objectives? Because sometimes people just come up with certain headings and you ask yourself, what's the correlation between this heading or the subheading and the topic? Or it may even correlate with the topic. But mind you, it may not correlate or align with the objectives, especially where the topic is very broad. Then the fellow has been able to streamline it by bringing what? Objectives. So it means that as the person reviews the literature, the focus should be using that literature to what? To cater for the objectives. Not just the entire study, not just the broad topic. No. So find out if the fellow has been able to do that. If not, give your own suggestion. Although this study, there's need to make the literature more focused on the objectives if you see the need for that. And of course, some people just come and they give literature, they review relevant literature and they present them in the study. Sometimes it could be just anyhow. But I always prefer, and you could take this, and of course, this is subjective. It can change. It depends on you as an examiner. I always prefer when people review literature, start from a global perspective, like the funnel, as though you are using the funnel style, the funnel which is wide at the top, but then as it goes down, it becomes slim. Okay, so I always prefer that when they review literature, they start from a global perspective and then come down to the regional perspective, and then of course the local perspective. What do I mean by that? If a study is to be conducted in South Africa, for instance, consider that study from while reviewing literature, check literature that have conducted similar study or speak to that study from a global perspective, maybe from other parts of the world, America, Asia, Australia, other continents. That's what I mean. Then you can now come down as you review that, bring it down to the African continent. As you bring it down to the African continent, still move down to the SADC region. From the SADC region, bring it down to South Africa. So what similar studies have been conducted or presented by scholars, or what are scholars within South Africa, which is a local area, saying about the same study? As long as it's a field that you can get such literature, there is need to explore. This will give readers a view of what other people are saying, especially scholars in the field. So there is need for you as an examiner to probably give such counsel where you see the need, except you don't see the need as you examine the thesis. But don't forget that even while they do that and bring it to the local literature, there is need for them to make their deductions. Very important. Please don't forget to always ensure that you check that area of making deductions. That's what gives you the idea or the knowledge that this fellow is able to review literature. So there's no need ticking the box to say the candidate is able to review literature, whereas it's not true. And then, of course, I just came here to say apply the upside down triangle thoughts, which I discussed earlier. Check the in-text citation if it is properly done. If not, give your own counsel. And of course, ensure consistency in the in-text citation style used. And then talking about theory issues, I also highlighted some points here, which are some of the things I've said earlier. Has the right model, conceptual model or framework been used? And can I say this here with regards to theory? Sometimes as an examiner, you could make the candidates do an extra work and the candidate will be happy and bless you for it. For example, in the area of theory, you could see the need to probably ask the candidate to come up with a conceptual model, maybe by fusing 2 or 3 theories together. You may see the need. You may see the need to say, oh, the candidate has come up with two conceptual frameworks, and you want him or her to come up with a model using the two framework, always check for such things. Because I found out that in the end, it gives the candidate uh, um, good credits if he or she is able to do that. It becomes something that he or she will own as his or her own. Because imagine two theories, two existing theories, or two existing models, and you are now suggesting to the candidates, find a way of fusing these two models together to come up with a new model. In that field, that candidate will be known for such. That, oh, this is the first person who did this. And of course, that fellow will be glad to say, oh, I got this from the examiner. The examiner may not know what he or she has done for me. So look about it, think about it, and look into such things. The idea is, as an examiner, you want to see what can I contribute, not only to the life and the study of that candidate, but to that field through that candidate's work. I know some examiner may feel it's not my business. After all, it's not my work. I am not the supervisor. My business here is just to examine and get paid for it. No, but it's about knowledge in the end. It's about knowledge production, and you'll be contributing to knowledge in that field by asking the candidate to do such a thing. The candidate may not like you initially because the candidate may feel burdened doing such thing, but in the end, the candidate may appreciate you for it. Okay? Now, when it comes to the issue of research method, very serious. This is one that people don't really always want to think about. There are several questions that needs to be answered. And of course, these are few questions I just picked up. And I really wish I'll share this PowerPoint slide so you can always read through and check. What's the alignment with the selected paradigm, approach, and the instruments? Because some people just say, I'll use this paradigm. At the end of the day, the approach they want to use does not align with that paradigm. The supervisor might not have done due diligence to check. Sometimes they say, I'll use this approach, and the instrument or instruments they choose to use may not align. So these are things that you want to check as an examiner. Is there alignment in this? Once again, you are checking the rigor there. If it's possible, sometimes I'll prefer that as an examiner, if it's possible, ensure when you want to examine a thesis or dissertation, do the research method on the same day. Don't just do half and then throw this, push it somewhere and come back to it later on. So that you know what has been done, you can read through, you know the rigor. Not some that you get engaged with several other things, and when you come back to continue from where you stopped, you might have forgotten some things. So, in my opinion, that's just my opinion. Of course, you know your best approach to such. You want to find out if the candidate has adopted a good method, a suitable method, not just good, a method suitable for the study. I've said that before. Has the candidate been able to justify, please, very important, not just adopting a suitable method, but has the candidate been able to justify the reason for that method? So a candidate says, I will use qualitative method, qualitative approach. Good, there's no problem. As long as qualitative approach is, you find it useful in that study, good. But then, is the candidate able to justify the reason for that? You may know the reason why he or she is such, but it's not your study. So if the candidate has not been able to justify it, indicate it there. Because at the end, somebody else may read that thesis when it is uploaded in the repository, and that becomes a guide misleading that person. And of course, you wouldn't have done justice at the end. Then ask yourself if the sample is relevant together with the size. So is a sample of the study relevant to what the candidate is doing? Is the size okay? Somebody says he's doing a quantitative study and he's saying he's using 50 respondents. And of course, check the terminologies too, because when you do qualitative, you use participants. And when you use quantitative, you use respondents. So now, doing a quantitative study and say I'm using 20 participants, rather 20 respondents, that's not good enough. That size already is too low, except the candidate has a good reason to justify that and has presented it. So you want to critique many of these things. Or somebody says he or she is doing a qualitative study and has 100 participants, and he or she would use face-to-face, one-on-one structured interview. 100. You want to ask yourself, when will this fellow finish the study? How many years will it take? Is it realistic? So these are things you want to find out and also comment on. Then you want to check if the data collected is appropriate for the study. And that's where the issue of the instrument comes in, the content of the instruments. Somebody has used a questionnaire, good, but the items of the questionnaire, are they relevant to the study? Somebody has used an interview schedule guide to conduct interviews. The items or the questions asked, are they relevant in relation to the objectives? I was asked my master students, oh, and this was an error, and I blame myself for it as well. I asked my master student to uh, um, do his interview schedule guide. And by the time he did that and presented it, I realized that even in the actual study, we have deviated. Good enough, we had that meeting to critique the interview schedule guide. And then we picked it up that the objectives were not even relevant, or rather, not let me say relevant, rather, they needed to be adjusted in the actual study. We could pick that up because we critiqued the interview schedule guide. So as an examiner, you may want to check that as well. And of course, you also want to check issues on ethics. Ethics. If it goes through, everything is fine, and you examine the thesis and that thesis passes well, and in the end, the issue of ethics is picked up later in future, somebody may want to ask, but an examiner examined this thesis. So what was the examiner doing or thinking when he or she passed the thesis? So you want to check issues of ethics. I'll cite an example. Sometimes you could have a colleague whose students collected the ethics from the university and then didn't bother to collect permission from the Department of Education. And that became an issue in the end. There was no way that student could submit that thesis for, for examination, because the question is, how was that student able to get into the school to collect data? There was no permission granted. So ethically speaking, it wasn't right. So as an examiner, you may want to pick that up. So imagine such a student submits his thesis to you and you are to examine such. How would you go about it? It's your portfolio to pick it up to say, no, such a study should have warranted, or there was need for permission from the Department of Education. So you flag that up. It's now left for the um, institution to finalize, the postgraduate school to finalize, okay, if this person is picking it up and says this person feels because of this, then something should be done. Okay. And of course, you want to check the issue of reliability, trustworthiness, validity, and so on. It's part of your duty to pick these things up, to be sure that they align, especially with the data collected and the study itself. And of course, the analysis. You may say, but I'm not an expert when it comes to probably analyzing quantitative data. Yes, but then you have a little knowledge on it. And when you don't even have a little knowledge, you can afford to engage someone who is an expert. There's nothing stopping that. Of course, you should flag it up with the institution, with the postgraduate school who sent the thesis to you to say, this is what I am doing with regards to this area, because they may not want you to just send the work of their students to anybody. So you must flag it up to say, this is what I will be doing here. And if they agree with you, fine. Should they disagree, then of course you can afford to decline examining the thesis. So somebody has used quantitative method and you are not an expert in that, you can engage somebody with the permission of the institution that sent it. Engage someone to help me check if the analysis is in order. Somebody has used qualitative, check, critique these things. And as you critique them in relation to the research objectives. Find out if they have covered the objectives, if they are in line. So, for example, objective 1 and 2 could be best achieved using quantitative method. And objective 3 and 4 could be best achieved using qualitative. Now, imagine the fellow using quantitative for all 4. You flag that up to say, no, there is need for X, Y, Z to be done. And then when it comes to research method as well, section, please check. This is one major mistake different students make. They end up reviewing literature in methodology session, research method session. So usually, okay, chapter 3, which is research methodology, you find out that people end up reviewing literature. I don't know if you have observed that. I've examined several different theses and I found out that people end up reviewing literature there. They tell you what Deploy et al. Says. They tell you what Kuma and Creswell, what they say. But they have not said what they did. Somebody is talking about paradigm. They are quoting literature. It's good. It's important to do such things, yes. But they have not stated there what paradigm their study adopted. Oh, this is their approach. They mention approach. Sometimes they have heading approach or probably mixed methods, and they just keep saying what scholars have said about mixed method. They've not mentioned what their study adopted. So you must help them differentiate whether they are reviewing literature in that session or they are actually giving you or stating the methodology and stating what they did. So that's important. Then talking about the findings. With regards to findings, you want to find out, check if the findings have been well presented or there's something missing. Find out if the findings have been presented subjectively or objectively. Sometimes students present their findings subjectively. And in that case, some things are removed. So you have the eagle eye. And so, as an examiner with the eagle eye, you should pick out those things that you think have been removed by asking them questions or asking them to fix those things. You also want to check if the findings cater for all the identified objectives. You may be amazed that a candidate may present 10 pages of one particular finding, and you think it covers everything. At the end of the day, the finding has only covered maybe 2 objectives out of 3. So you should be able to pick it up to say 3 objectives were identified in chapter 1, but in this chapter, the finding covers only 2 objectives. Sometimes there could be some repetitions or overlap. Pick those things up to say, why this? And so that the students can go ahead to correct such things. Because it's a voluminous document sometimes, when it is not mini dissertation, students always feel like they won't pick this up, they won't pick that up. So as an examiner, you should be able to pick them up. And then you want to ask if the candidate has been able to support or contrast findings. Now, these are 2 different things. And I always pick this up many a time when I examine thesis. People always want to say, present their findings. They just drop their findings like that. And then they go on to present their discussion of findings. But in the actual sense, and this is my own school of thought, this is what I am driving home. When such findings are presented, when they present findings, I expect the use of few literature, 1 or 2, to support or contrast such findings on that spot. Then when they do the discussion of findings, what they do is to unpack and elaborate using more literature. So I am a fan, and I'm always at home with this to check whether candidates have been able to support their findings with literature, at least briefly. Then when they go to their discussion of findings, are they able to unpack it? And this is one thing you should check. I examined a doctoral thesis recently, and I found out that the candidates failed to do a discussion of findings. Rather, I was doing summary later on. I had to flag that up to say, no, there should be a session for discussion of findings. It did the work, but used a different heading, which in my opinion was wrong. Then I also stated here, when mixed methods approach has been adopted, has the candidates been successfully presented the findings in the appropriate sections, or is there a need to split the results? Now, I'm saying this based on my experience. I shared my story with you, but I did my PhD. So as an examiner, you also have that power to, to suggest such. Believe me, as an examiner, the institution believes in you, and so much is expected of you. You are like the eye of the university. So, like Krista rightly said, that not, I think it was from Northwest, right? Let's ask him to some Northwest. It means that the governing body of Northwest University believes so much in you, in your expertise in that field, to say, decide for us whether this candidate qualifies for a higher study or not. Because this is if it is thesis, doctoral thesis is purely by research. If it were to be masters now, it's still fair. If it's mini dissertation, it's still fair because there are other minor, other things that they will check, not just the research alone that will qualify the candidates or the students, but other things, other coursework. But in the case of masters by research or PhD, of course, is purely research. So it means that the institution as a whole, the leadership believes in you. And that's why you must not, you can't afford to let them down. And finally, here I said, your recommendation may be very useful. And I mean very useful. In the concluding chapter, as an examiner, ensure to find out the following. Check if the candidate has been able to summarize the findings. And not just summarize the findings, but summarize the findings based on each objective. Now, this will help you know if the candidate has been able to achieve each of the objectives. So check that. Once you pick the summary and you check, okay, is it in line? Does it really make sense to you as a reader, let alone other readers? Check if the candidate is able to discuss each finding using relevant sources. So not just the summary alone, you should be able to discuss the findings. And that's where you must check that session of discussion of findings. I also must state here, please, that sometimes students can be innovative. What do I mean by that? Somebody can afford to say, okay, he or she is using a mixed method or qual and quant. And then in a chapter, they present their findings on the quantitative study. In another chapter, they present their findings on the qualitative study. And the next chapter, they do the discussion. So discussion of both the qual and the quants. So fine. So as you read through, please ensure that you check. The person can be innovative, but make sure that the information needed, at least one way or the other, are provided. If where you are not in tune with the innovation, flag it off to say, this should be adjusted to X, Y, Z. Especially where you are aware of the templates of the university. And sometimes the university, when they send you a thesis or dissertation to examine, they send you a guide. That guide will give you an idea of what their template looks like. So most times, use the guide there, provided there. Many a time when I examine thesis or dissertation, I always want to section them into headings, abstract, title, abstract, keyword, chapter 1, chapter 2, and all the various headings in the different chapters like that. But then I also check, like the last thesis I examined, I had to check what the university sent as their guideline. So they did not send, they didn't want the issue of chapter 1, chapter 2. They just wanted introduction, of course, which was the chapter 1. And then they wanted the literature review. So I used what they sent. So check if what, try to use what they sent. And don't forget that the student is at liberty to be innovative. But where the innovation is going haywire, then call back the student's attention to such and ask for an adjustment. Then, is the conclusion of the study well stated based on the entire research outcome, not just based on one outcome? Check if the conclusion is in alignment. If it's not, there is need to air your views there. And of course, as the student being able to give the appropriate recommendations in alignment to the findings of the study. So not just recommendations, but the recommendation must be in alignment with the findings of the study. So I could be thinking, oh, policy is useful. There's need to create a policy that will help X, Y, Z. But the issue of policy that I'm raising now, does it speak to the findings of the study? If it doesn't speak to it, state it there that this is not in alignment to the finding of the study. It must be. There could be some juicy recommendations, but the question is, are those recommendations in alignment with the findings of the study? If no, then there's no need. They don't worth being there. Being a dissertation or thesis, you may want to recommend that the candidates or the students split the recommendations into relevant headings. For example, to policymakers, maybe based on policy, recommendation based on literature, also contribution to literature now, contribution based on practice. This could also help to say, okay, split your recommendations into these various headings. It could help. Um, the most important thing is you want to suggest something that will aid easy reading so that at a glance, when readers look through, they are comfortable reading such and it's making sense and helpful to them. Now, this is just my general thoughts, and it's important as well that we look at such things. We want to check the issue of spellings. In fact, to start with, the language used. Of course, we all know there's a difference between British English, American English, even South African English. And in the actual sense, whatever English that is used, British, American, South African, they are all recognized. They are all okay. But what is not allowed is a mixture. So there is need for consistency. So if somebody decides to use British English, it should be British from the beginning to the end. And I'll give an example here. If I spell the word program without ME at the end, I just put program. That's American English, American style of spelling program. And then I spell color, COLOR. That's American. Good. If I use such and I ensure everything is consistent with American English, I'm fine. But if maybe I spell program in chapter 1, program, and maybe somewhere in chapter 4, I spell color, COLOUR. The two spellings are correct, but I am wrong because I have mixed now. COLOUR is British. So as an examiner, pick such things up. Because in the end, once it is uploaded in the repository and somebody picks it up, the fellow will say, for somebody examining this thesis, your integrity is at stake at that point. And of course, you don't want such. Now, very, very importantly, the issue of the reference lists. And this is one thing I have realized and I've seen over few years now examining thesis and dissertation. I found out that the issue of reference is a big thing. You will see some references that are cited in text, but on the reference list, they don't appear. You see some references that appear on the reference list, but they were never cited in the text. Now, these things can happen because the student will assume, sometimes it's not intentional, especially where they are not using any software, such as Mendeley or EndNotes to do these things. They may just assume that they have put the references. Sometimes they just put some reference on the reference lists, forgetting that they never used it, or probably they used it initially, but at some point they deleted it, and then they forget to delete it on the reference list. It's part of your duty to check everything. And because the reference list is always a lengthy one, people get tired and bored. Even supervisors get tired checking those things, so they may not check. So as an examiner, if I show you some of the theses I've examined, you'll be amazed that I had a whole long list running into pages of inconsistency issues. They were never used in the text, but they appeared on the reference list, or the ones that appeared on the in the in-text never appeared on the reference list. These are issues that you should pick up. Also check the consistency in the referencing style. As the person mixed Harvard and APA, even APA, as the person mixed 6th and 7th edition, whatever edition, the person must be consistent. Flag these things. And I usually want to copy and paste it in my reports to say this does not appear or this is not properly done, so that the exam, it is left for the students and the supervisor to go back and look through those things and adjust them. I'll give you a very simple example. I examined a thesis, and funny enough, let me just use this example. I can't remember the name again, but the difference was just one alphabet. In the text, the students spelled the name and added I. On the reference list, I was omitted. I had to pick that up to say, this reference appears in the text, but does not appear on the reference lists. And this reference appears on the reference list, but does not appear in the text, because in the actual sense, it's not the same name. If I want to spell Christy and I spell Christy as Christy in the text, and then on the reference list, I spell as Christ. They are two different names. It's just the difference is just alphabet Y, right? But they are two different names. So as an examiner, please check these things and pick them up. Pick them up to help the students. In the end, it's not as if you are making the student fail. You are making the student go back to work and appreciate that study again. And of course, the chapters should be structured. I mean, well structured. The introduction of each chapter should capture the relevant information and signposts. This is one thing people don't do. They just say, oh, this is chapter 2. They just tell us what chapter 2, literature review, and they start reviewing. There is need, as long as it's a main dissertation or thesis, there is need for every chapter to have an introduction. Chapter 2 should have an introduction, and some people don't do that. So what that does is it helps to give readers idea of what they should expect in that chapter. So as an examiner, pick it up and tell them, no, do the right thing. They may not like it, but that's what is needed. Then they must do it. Sometimes I see, and of course, this is subjective once again. I see the end of a chapter, people put conclusion. Personally, I frown at that, because are you actually concluding? And I said this is subjective. I prefer to use the word summary. And I always flag it to say, I suggest the use of summary. But then there's need to go back again. And this is what I do, or what I did the last one. I had to note it somewhere that my recommendation or suggestion of the use of summary, chapter summary, is subject to the structure of the template of the university. So if the university template says conclusion, as an external examiner, I can't just come up to say, oh, use summary. No, I'll be doing the student a disfavor because the student must have used the template of the university where he or she is registered. So it's just a suggestion. But I prefer, because I believe what is done in that chapter is actually a summary that is presented in that section. And another thing you should check is the numbering, especially the table and the figures. Sometimes these things are not well numbered because the student is in a hurry to submit. So pick those things up and allow them do the right thing. It's important. And then check the consistency, the consistent use of abbreviations. Check. And where they need to use abbreviation, check. Even the use of sources, the citation, check how it is presented. If they decide to present their references using alphabetical order, it's fine. If they choose to use it based on the year, it's also fine. But the major thing is there should be consistency from the beginning to the end. So, for example, where two sources are cited at the end of a particular sentence, some people may choose to say, oh, maybe Duma 2020 and John 2022. That's fine. Going by year, oh, the oldest comes before the latest. Fine. But check subsequently, has that fellow been able to maintain that order? Or maybe Duma D comes before John J. If that's the case, has the person been able to maintain that order from the beginning to the end? So you find out that these are minor things, but they are critical things that we take serious in research. And we want the students to ensure that they do the needful. So you must check. And where abbreviations are used, like I noted here for IR, you also want to check if the right abbreviations have been used and if there's consistency in the use of such. In a nutshell, I've stated here that as an examiner, you have the power to save the next generation through your examination. You may not believe it, but that's the truth. Hence, there is need to be critical and ensure due diligence. On this note, thank you. All right, I think we can take questions now. If there are questions, which I believe there should be.
Thank you so much, Prof. Chinaza, for that detailed presentation. I think I've highlighted all the important things that examiners should look out for in dissertations and theses. So yes, we are going to take questions now. Any questions from the attendees? You are more than welcome to ask any question. Please unmute yourself if you want to ask, and then you can raise your hand to your question to Prof. Chinaza.
Yes, I see a hand up.
Yes, you can unmute and speak.
Isaac, go ahead.
You are muted, Isaac.
Isaac, you can unmute and speak. Oh, Isaac is typing. Oh, Isaac said he can't unmute.
Okay, let me check the settings and see if I've enabled. Isaac, I have enabled all the mics, so you can just unmute from your side and speak. Or you rather type the question on the chat so that we can raise it to Prof. Chinasa if you are unable to speak.
Can you try to unmute, Isaac? Okay, Isaac is typing. While Isaac is typing, if there's any other question.
Okay, in the meantime, while Isaac is still typing, can I please remind you all to complete the feedback survey that is on the chat? I'll post it again for the last time for those who didn't see it. Can I request that we all complete the feedback survey?
Okay, Isaac is saying, what about a scenario where 2 or 3 examiners differ in their recommendations? All right. Thank you, Isaac, for that question. And that's why you must do due diligence as you examine the thesis. Make sure you have done your own parts. Normally, what certain institutions do is for masters, they have 2 examiners who would examine and one a third, which is called the alternates. And then for PhD, they have 3 examiners and a fourth, which is the alternates. For mini dissertation, most times it's just one. Okay. Um, Now, for the two, when it comes to masters, now for masters, the mark is important. Marks are awarded. For PhD, some institutions ask for marks to be awarded, but they don't really count sometimes. It is the recommendation of the examiner to accept or reject that really counts. Now, let me come down to your question. If you were to be masters and the 2 examiners accept, what they do is they check the marks that have been awarded, add up the marks, and divide by 2 to get the average. And that's what will be awarded to the students. If the 2 examiners differ, so for example, one says accept, the other one says reject. He's not asked to reject. He can't just say reject like that. He can say send back to me. So probably give some recommendations and ask them to send the thesis back to him or her before he or she can give a mark. But if he says reject without giving mark, then the institution can afford to use the third examiner, who is the alternate. They can contact that person to say, examine this dissertation. Where the third person is saying reject again, then it becomes a challenge. Because out of 3, 2 people are saying reject, then it means that the first examiner who accepted has not done due diligence. So the onus will be on the postgraduate school or the committee responsible for that, for finalizing that work. The onus will be on them to decide whether the students or the candidate will have to go and fix so many things again. And then they could decide to have an internal examiner examine it. So usually when they give such tasks to examiners, the guide that they give, they box them into making decisions. What do I mean by that? So you could have the first one could be accept as it is, meaning the student does not need to make corrections. You are okay with it 100%. The next could be accept subject to supervisor's approval, meaning you are flagging off some things, but you want the supervisor to be the one to be in charge, to see to it that the student uh, um, does those corrections. So it could be accept a minor revision, subject to supervisor's approval. In some instances, it could be accept with the approval of any other person other than the supervisor. So in some instances, the examiner might have observed that no, the things that I've picked up here now, I won't want the supervisor to be the one to approve whether the student has done justice or not. So it could be a case of accept with the consent of another supervisor, another examiner, sorry, other than the supervisor, because the examiner does not want them to return the work to him, or probably he feels that it's not worth returning back to him. Somebody within the faculty or the department can still check if due diligence has been done. And some other times the recommendation could be return to me for final approval. So the examiner may want that work to be returned back to him or her to approve finally, to check if the revision has been done as expected. And of course, it can also be rejected outrightly. So all this can happen. Any of these can happen. But where that's why there's need for more than one examiner in this case. In the case of mini dissertation, whatever the examiner says is final there, except the supervisor and the students can argue their case well, then the work may be sent out to somebody else. But in the case of main dissertation and um, uh, um, thesis, then any of these things which I outlined earlier can come up. Then they expect that two, or rather three of the examiners should be saying same thing, maybe accept, or two out of the three. If two out of the three says accept and one says reject, then the committee can decide to say they want an internal review. So they may ask for an internal review, and somebody will just review it internally within the faculty and approve. Where two say reject and one say accept, then you can be sure that an internal review will not be enough. There may be need to contact the alternate examiner. So the alternate examiner may be contacted to make his decision, his or her decision. And where the alternate examiner agrees with the other examiner who says accepts, then they could just use another report from an internal reviewer to augment, and that gives us the three reports. So most times, besides what the examiner's report states, the committee responsible who will finally approve it within the faculty level will be the ones to decide certain things. And not just within the faculty level. Mind you, that committee will be made up of people from the departments and other departments within the faculty, the research units, the research office, somebody from the research or PG school must be involved. And then they could also have somebody from a different faculty entirely. So it's not just a case of one person within the faculty deciding whose work is accepted or rejected. No. So based on your examination, a decision will be made, but not just your own examination alone. That's why you must give your full reports. Sometimes where there's a clash like that, maybe out of the three, two people says accept, and you are the only one saying reject, they may want to check, they may choose to check what are the comments made. So if what you have flagged as serious issues, then it may worth deliberation again. I hope I answered your question, Isaac. Thank you. And of course, let me just add this again with the UJ recent practice. That's the reason for Viva now. The reason for Viva. I know many of you don't like, many people don't like Viva, but that's one reason why they are bringing in the Viva. So now with the Viva, some examiners can change their mind. So all five of us may be examiners, and we examine a thesis. And by the time we do the Viva, maybe I have said reject the thesis or resubmit for examination. By the time the student does, or the candidate does the Viva, of course, this is for PhD alone, not masters. When the candidate does the Viva and presents his work again, written work is different from spoken. So maybe by the time the person presents and speaks, because at Viva you speak, and I have the liberty to ask questions, that examiner may understand the work better and see to it that, oh, this person was correct, I was wrong, I misread or misinterpreted what I read. So there is need to approve the work. So at the point of the Viva, that examiner can tell the candidate there's no need resubmitting your work. Just probably do the correction or forget about XYZ comments that were made. I understand better. So that's the good use of Viva. Okay, I believe I've said a mouthful there. If there is any other question or maybe any other area of clarity. Krista,
Hi, yes.
any question or comments or clarity, area of clarity?
No, just a massive thank you. This has been really, really helpful.
Oh, I'm glad. Pumlani, Sam, oh,
Okay, Prof. Chinaza, in the absence of questions and comments, we would like to take this opportunity to thank you for honoring our invitation and presenting this session for us. And we will also like to thank the attendees. It was such a very small number of people, but I believe that everyone benefited from this session. Can I also please ask that you send me the presentation so that I can upload it on our Moodle community as well as the recording? So thank
all
you
right.
very much, and thank you to the attendees. And here we can now close the session.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks to Isaac, thanks to Krista for making this time, and of course to Pumlani as well. Do have a wonderful rest of the day. Oh, Pumlani is now coming in. Pumlani, I hope it's not a question. If it's not a question, it's fine. If it's a question, it's also fine. But we've actually ended the session.
Oh, sorry, Prof. I was trying to unmute and
I
then
guess as such.
yes, I
No worries.
mistakenly pressed the leave button. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. All right. Thank you so much. And thanks to Petso for organizing this. Please go spread the news around and let's see how we can get the best out of examination of thesis and dissertation. Allow me to say thank you to you all once again. Do have the best of the rest of the day.
You too, Prof. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Prof.